Good afternoon. This is Debra B. Wilson. It's probably more apropos to say good early evening. It's Wednesday, the 18th of July, 2018. The time is 1700 hours and 9 minutes. That's GMT minus 6, and I'm in Winnipeg. For a long time now, I've been attempting, without much luck, to capture Winnipeg. How I experienced the organic experiences with people, Winnipeggers and people who frequent Winnipeg. And I struggled for a lot of reasons, and that's really not necessary for me to go into, not today, not now. But anyway, I'd like to share some experiences with you. Today, when I was returning home in beginning my evening commute, I happened to walk by a man who was sitting in a doorway. I actually didn't know what he was smoking. It was a cigarette, when I looked at him, I was looking at him, trying to understand why he was sitting in a doorway. It wasn't a private home, and why he was sitting there smoking a cigarette. As it turned out, it was a cigarette. I always try to be specific, and I know I sometimes drill down. It wasn't. So the reason I emphasized that I didn't know what it was, it's not to imply anything one way or the other. I just didn't know what he was smoking. That was factual. So when I looked at him, I was looking at him because I didn't know what he was. Actually, initially I didn't know what he was doing. Then I didn't know what he was smoking. And he said, "I'm all right. I'm okay." And he told me not to worry about him. Well, my guess is he misread the look on my face. Well, in any case, he stood up and he started talking to me, and he said, and I am going to censor some of the things he said. He said it was okay that he had just come from a doctor's appointment, and he was sitting there resting, trying to, I'm paraphrasing here, trying to make sense of the doctor's appointment. So he was sharing quite a bit, and he was informing me that we had the boundaries of our, in quotes, relationship. Two total strangers on the streets, but because he was what most people would think was oversharing, I took the opportunity, because I'm always curious about people and their lives and how they define in myriads of ways, and how they connect to the space in which they live, the city, the town, the country. And my focus is typically around issues of security, but I'm always fascinated how people define who they are and why they define the way they are. So I apologized in advance. I read the situation again, that he had established a certain amount of intimacy because he appeared to be in some level of shock about his doctor's appointment, and he was oversharing. So I took the opportunity to repeatedly apologize to him, and then ask him if he was a Winnipegger, and he told me no, he just said no. And then I said, I'm sorry, I'm new to Winnipeg, and I'm trying to understand things and people, and I asked if he was Indigenous. And again, I probably would have asked anyway, but I think I felt it was easier to ask him because he had already initiated and set the boundaries of our quote-unquote relationship is quite intimate in his sharing. He told me he was Indigenous, and then he went on to say he didn't live, he said this is Winnipeg, and he told me the name of the reserve he lived on. He said that he was here, again he repeated, that he was here because of a doctor's appointment. And I asked if he was okay, and he told me about his symptoms, which were quite serious. So I think I should just go ahead and say it. I guess one of the ways I define, and that the space in which I occupy wherever I'm living, is that to be productive, and how I define productivity. So for me, that has been, over the years, feminist-based activism. Because of the UK, that feminist-based activism went in directions because of the myriad of ways feminism is defined in the UK. London, I was in London. It led me to a path of understanding that civilians, feminist civilians, can do their own engagement with security. So I'm always curious about if people feel a part of, included, and how they and why they do or don't. So I started asking him, and I apologized in advance and told him that it was an ignorant question, but I said, I noted that he had very long hair. It was probably down to the middle of his back. It was loose. And I've been to several political events that involve Indigenous and Métis persons, and they've discussed the identity and belonging around their hair, and how their hair, and I don't want to diminish or minimize anything, and the way in which they display their hair. So I stumbled because I didn't want to offend him, but I asked him if he could explain to me. I asked if the length of his hair had something to do with his identity, and how he constructed his identity. And before he looked, I thought he might have been offended, and I quickly jumped in and said that I don't relax my hair because it is who I am. My kinky, very, very curly hair is my identity. It is the display of what's in my DNA, my genetics, who I am, who and what I connect to. And he looked at me and he said, I wear my hair like this, and I'm quoting, because I'm Indian. And he talked about ceremonial roles that he participated in on a regular basis with his brother. The talk was 5 to 10 minutes. And to me, I think what was so amazing for me is this total stranger, and how we negotiate spaces all the time. And relationship, we're in relationship all the time. I don't know how to drive, so I take public transportation. And a perfect example of that is when you get on the bus, and when you're sitting by yourself in the seat and someone sits next to you, you can be that person in the seat sharing relationship that doesn't scoot over to make sure the person has enough room, or you can be the person that I always try to be, to scoot over to make sure the person is comfortable. We're always in a relationship. So for me, that encounter with this gentleman gave voice, because we don't want to walk around saying, I'm in a relationship with you, my fellow commuters on the bus in Winnipeg. We don't do that, but we actually are in a relationship all the time. And so, I cry all the time, sorry. it's those times that you acknowledge that you are, even in the most casual of circumstances, that you recognize not just your humanity, but the humanity of the person you're engaged with on a very casual basis, and that you have connected with each other's humanity. And so, in any case, we stood there talking, and at the end of the conversation, because I commuting here in Winnipeg in the evening is a bit of something. We don't have a rail system, so everything is above ground. And boy, so I wanted to catch my bus, and in any case, I said, and you never know people's faith practices, or if they're a person of no faith, but in any case, I said, God bless you. And he reached out to me and held my right hand and held it in both of his hands and said, God bless you too. Before I left, I asked him if he was going to be okay, and he told me that who had driven him to the doctor. I didn't even think about that part. And he pointed to this man who was sitting in a car. It was a man of African descent. I'm mentioning that to be as descriptive as possible. So I didn't know the indigenous man I was talking to. I didn't know the man in the car. But I just turned and I waved at him, and he was sort of on his phone, but kind of looking at this exchange between the two of us. The window, he was the driver, the window on his side was rolled up, I could see that, but on the passenger side, it was rolled down. And he was sort of on his cell phone, it looked as if he was texting, but I think, again, he was trying to figure out what was going on between the two of us. So when I waved at him, it was a couple of seconds, he waved back. And that was that. But it is, as ever, indicative of Winnipeg. Now, I'm crying. I cry all the time, all the time. I'm so impassioned with the desire to understand how, why we connect and why we don't, from a security perspective, and how we engage. Because for me, security is a basic human right. It is a part of, it should be your inalienable rights, and it is actually, whether it's recognized where you're at, wherever that may be. And I also think it's the way in which we give voice to how we construct this existence that is life. And for those of us who are faith, how we connect to the divine is how we feel we need to be safe, and those who are nearest and dearest to us, and however we construct what is nearest and dearest. So in any case, speaking of security, over the last, well, for quite some time now, it's not just regular civilians I stop on the street. I stop police officers on the street and engage them in conversation. And so I have to think very quickly. 1, 2, 4. So this is 4 police officers. 3 separate incidents, occasions. One was at Pride. One was when I was walking home from the bus in the evening commute. And then the most recent one was at the Forks. And that was last Wednesday. So, I'm going to tell you about the experiences, and I want to make sure. The one at the first one was at Pride, and I actually did that occasion meeting. All the police officers were white, happened to be white. All of them were appear to be white, I should say that, and all of them were, I'm fairly confident, defined themselves as men, male. They were all young. I'm 60 and almost 61. I'm going to say they were all probably half my age. That's probably good, I guess. Well, in each case, I told them about the research I was doing. I just stopped them on the street, since we're talking about the Pride one, which I'll repost that podcast with him. And that I wanted to, so what I do is I watch police officers. And I watch to see how they are with people who display identities other than the majority, because every city and every place in the country and continent has a hierarchy. So I watch to see how they maneuver when they're dealing with different identities. And this young man at Pride, he seemed very comfortable. And I watched after two white men before me asked him a question, and I came along. There was no changing his body language. He was professional. There was no leering at me, no discomfort, no trying to, talk black to the black lady. No, he stayed himself. And I started talking about the research and the work I had done in the UK. You can stop Winnipeg police officers and talk to them. They're just like, well, I've done that in Israel as well. But the cops I have the longest history with are the cops in the Metropolitan Police in London, England. But I also with Birmingham, England, you can stop them too and talk to them. So those are the cops that I've had. Anyway, so this Winnipeg cop at Pride, and I was talking to him about this very topic of dealing with identities and how that I had been watching him. Interestingly enough, that didn't freak him out. And he made the comment, and I'm quoting, "I'm trying. We're trying. Thank you for that. We're trying." He said, we're trying. Thank you for saying that. So next I'm going to fast forward to the cop that I was in my commute. And I was walking, and there was an event with children, like primary kids. And so I was watching this cop, and he did not see me because his back was to me at all time. And there were, the majority of the children appeared to be white. There were black children. There were female children. There were Asian children. And there were visibly Muslim female children because they were covered in hijabs. I watched to see, and I could hear him talking to the different children, and I listened to see if his language changed. He kept the same, his voice was friendly, but with authority. There was no shift in his body language. He was very appropriate with all the children. He kept the same robust voice. He didn't do this baby talk with the females. He wasn't standoffish with the Muslim children or the black children or the Asian children. He didn't seem more comfortable with one identity as opposed to another. So, after I watched him for a while, I went up to him and I told him I had been watching him. And that was what his response was. He laughed. "Okay, that's the way to start a conversation." I said, "Yeah, I just heard myself say that to a cop, yes." So I told him, I introduced myself, I told him about the research and the work I had done in London, England. And he was telling me, I've been very, I'm going to say exactly what he said. And I said that you can see I'm black and I'm older and female, but what you don't know is that I'm Muslim. And he said right away, he said, I haven't made a difference with any of the children that I've been engaged with here. And I said, "I did tell you I was watching you. I saw that you didn't," and that's what I want to say. I was very impressed by your professionalism and the way the sense of equality you reinforced in the space with the children. I said, that's very powerful messaging. And he said, because I'm not being terribly specific about the specific place and space I saw him in, he said, I realize there are bad cops, but he said, and that's what he said, but most of us, we want to do our best. And he said we do things like this to do outreach to communities because we want to build, and I said relationships. He said that's what we're trying to do, build healthy, sound relationships. So I was looking at him as he was speaking. He said a lot more, but I don't want to say too much. But I remember I nearly fainted when he said, I know they're bad cops, but he said most of us, we're not bad. And he went on to say, we like our jobs, we love helping the community and serving the community, and we want to be with the community. And he said, I know some communities have trust issues with us. And I said, yes, I'm also aware of that. And he said, and that makes me sad. This is a cop. He said more, but I'm going to move on to the most recent two cops. They were out doing some training. And if I say, because I said I saw them at the forest, and if I say specifically what the training was, I don't know, maybe somebody can identify them, I don't know. So I watched them for a while. It was actually, I was watching them while I was doing the podcast. They might actually be in the podcast. So this might be a moot point, but anyway. Because I tried to keep the camera down so you couldn't see people's feet, but couldn't see their faces, so you, anyway. But in any case, they were doing some training. I asked them, I watched for like 15 minutes, and then I got up and I went over and I introduced myself to them. And they started talking, and I told them the work I was doing, the research I was doing, and they started talking. And there was one of the two that was more vocal. And then I'll start with the vocal one, because there was one that was more vocal, and then one was more, his face was more expressive. But anyway, the more vocal one, he had a rough and tumble kind of personality, kind of gruff. And I thought to myself, okay, all right, well, here we go. And he seemed, could have been the moment, or it could have been his personality, or it could have been both. So when he said, we're trying, I almost thought he was snapping at me. And he said, he talked about the frustration. And then I realized that was what the tone was. It was frustration. And he said, we're trying. I know people think we don't care. We do care. We want to be there for the community. And I'm just standing there and listening to this kid who's like half my age, who's a freaking cop, a white male cop. And I'm standing there and I'm looking at him and realizing that what I picked up wasn't attitude or him being flippant. He sounded frustrated. And then the other ones jumped in and said, we're here for the community, all communities. He said, we're here. Then the one that I previously and erroneously thought was gruff, was a bit gruff, he piped in and he said, people think we don't have time for them. You can stop us on the street anytime. He said, if we're going off to make an arrest or going off to attend to a situation, he said, it might appear that we're blowing you off, but come to us, talk to us. We want you to come to us. We want you to be able to do what you're doing right now. He said, and if one of us says or does something you don't like, he said, come back to us and tell us about it. We want you to, he said, talk to us. He said, we want you to talk to us. We want you to engage with us. And then he said, again, we're trying. And I told him about his colleague at Pride. I said, and he said, oh, he said the same thing. And I said, he said the exact same words, we're trying. So I think that's also indicative of Winnipeg. I understand the tremendous sense of betrayal some communities in this city feel in terms of the police service, the Winnipeg Police Service. The communities I'm thinking about are the Indigenous communities, specifically around issues, but larger, if not larger. The sense of betrayal exceeds the horrific tragedy that is a murdered, missing Indigenous women and girls. It far exceeds that. And I am in no way diminishing that. That is something I would never do. I'm only attempting to find out and understand where the people who are in relationships, where those persons in the relationship are, and how they experience the relationship and what they seek going forward. That is what my goal is, to bear witness to that. And then how people are in those relationships and how they construct the ways in which they are in those relationships, how that impacts individual security and collective security for all. Okay? Roughly speaking, that's what my work is about. I'm impassioned by, I've experienced people in Britain, people in Canada, and people in Israel wearing their hearts and emotions on their sleeve. I have not had difficulty with engaging with people and listening to them give voice to how they feel and experience their relationships with fellow citizens and the state around issues of security, and how that, from beyond an operational point of view, because ultimately what I'm trying to get to is how those relationships are experienced and what that it does impact operationally for us in terms of security. But in terms of hearing people's humanity and what they feel about those tasked to keep them safe, and how that touches on people's sense of self, sense of justice, sense of the way in which the universe is designed, and how they experience that, and the place in which they find their life, and the ways in which they live their lives out. It never ceases to move me, and often to tears. So that's a little bit about Winnipeg. How can I do a city like that justice? So I continue to struggle to present this city accurately as I continue to struggle with the UK and with Israel. This is Debra V. Wilson, and I'm in Winnipeg. More later, but soon. Thank you.